Okay, today we're going to be painting this Sister Superior from the Novitiates Kill Team box. We're going to be painting the whole box, but we're only going to show the Sister Superior because she's superior. So once she stops spinning, we'll get right into it. Okay, we're going to start with the Zenithal Prime as usual. And we're going into the bottom here. We're going into the lower layers with some Cantor Blue for all of this. For all these undergarments, just the pants basically, and I'll come back a little later and just finish up a little area of the sleeve that I forgot to do in this first part, rather annoyingly. And then I'm going to be using Garagak Sewer for the leather on the boots and the gloves. I like Garagak Sewer, it's got a good leather feel to it, flows really well into the recesses, gives you a good bit of contrast and a good bit of shading and volume without too much effort, and it's perfect for this area because it's not the focus of the model, but we do want to still have a nice effect on it. And as I said earlier, coming back with the Cantor Blue, just some of these areas that I missed in these sleeves. So I feel like this blue undergarment that she'll have put on first, and then we'll come back and do the rest of the bits on top. XV88, lovely bright saturated orangey brown for some of these leather robes that she's got on, and as you can see the girls there in the corner, the rest of the kill team, they've got a bit more of this because the over robe, which we're doing later, I think is what sets the Sister Superior apart, but this lovely browny orangey saturated colour for this sort of almost leathery canvas garment that she's got on here. Just making sure I get all the bits, and I've done this first before I've come back with the Garagak Sewer for the gloves, because painting over any mistakes would be a bit of a pain. So there we go, Garagak Sewer, just some of these remaining items that I want for this leathery feel. Just being careful with some of the details. I don't want to flow too much into the areas I don't want to paint, but you don't have to be too careful with this contrast paint step, because when you come back with the base paints over the top, you're going to have too much of a problem. Now, Sigval Burgundy for the inside of her lovely red cloak, because I want a bit of contrast between the inside and the outside to set them apart, but also that deep red against that brighter orangey brown from the XV88 really sets up a nice layer of contrast for this less important area. We'll get more contrast when we go into the area around her face. So now Mephiston red, lovely bright red, all over all of this outer robe that she has on. Just being careful not to touch onto any of the other areas, because they'll be difficult to fix, because it is a very fiddly little model, as most of these kill team models are. And I'm just being careful, extra careful here, because I've got this lovely effect on this little area that I want to keep white, where there's a skull on her robe, and I want to keep that completely clear, because the Zenithal Prime has worked out actually really well on this area. I want to keep that effect, so I'm being very careful around these edges, and just trying to keep this as smooth as possible when I apply it. So the paint's quite thin down, but not too watery. And as you can see here, I've done the entire robe in this lovely Mephiston red. I'm just recoating here to get some of the areas that aren't quite as even as I want them to be. Now I'm using Vallejo black, and I'm just filling in the interior area of her, I wouldn't say it's a crown, her headpiece. And I'm just being very careful not to touch any of the white around here that I want to keep white, because as I said, this Zenithal Prime's worked out really well, and for this red to white contrast between her headpiece and her cloak is going to look absolutely amazing. But I really want to keep that white area really clean. It's a lot of realies. And now there's her sort of neck apparatus, breathing equipment, or whatever it is that it is. We're going to paint this black as well, but we're going to get this super clean super careful around that headcloth, because we want that lovely and bright white. So this single point of focus is going to be really draw our eye, because it's so bright white against all these other colours. Now, Retributor Gold, or Retributor Armour, for all the gold areas. So this lovely shoulder piece, and want to be really careful here because we don't want to affect the paint that we've already done. We're getting the sword hilt. We're also going to be getting some of the little details here. There we go, just going into the sword handle and the sword hilt. That top piece on her power pack, or just above her head. And then very carefully now we're getting into this head apparatus that she's got going on, and being very careful not to get onto the black that we've already painted, because we don't want to try and fix that. And I'm getting some of the little trinkets that she's got as well. So there's this this cross on her waistband, all in gold. And then once that's finished, we're going to go with the dark aluminium from Vallejo just over the top of the blade, but I'm also going to do her entire plasma pistol in this. And the reason I've used dark aluminium as opposed to the lead belcher that I normally use is I find that this goes on a little smoother, but it also just looks a little bit cleaner, and I get the feel that these sitters of battle take great pride in their appearance, and they're not going to be having dirty swords and dirty pistols. They're going to spend plenty of time keeping them clean and tidy, so they can go out there and give out the Emperor's justice in the best possible dress. Okay, with all the metal done, I'm going to use Vallejo Pale Flesh to start with, just to come inside and get her face painted. And again, I'm being super careful, so I've got my brush fairly loaded, and the paint is quite thin, so I can very easily run into these spaces and all these little nooks and crannies without overflowing onto the white around the face. And then when we add a wash this later, that wash is going to flow into those recesses and frame her face really well. And then we'll bring back highlights, which will add more to the contrast. Frostheart Blue, just quickly for the plasma pistol charging port, or the little exhaust port. We're not going too crazy on this, not too much detail, because again we want the focus up there in her face. So a little bit of contrast blue just to get into those recesses, give it a nice plasma feel without a great deal of detail and a great deal of time spent. Okay, the most nerve-wracking part of painting this miniature was definitely this step. Using the Retributor Armour and one of my finest brushes, fairly watered down the paint, so I've got as much control as I can possibly get out of it. I'm going super carefully into the edges of these robes. And then there's this little fleur-de-lis on her back, which on the box art is white, but I think it just looks so much better in gold. So being very careful only to paint the raised area of this fleur-de-lis and the raised area of these edge parts of the robe, and not mess up the work that we've already done on the red, because we're going to come back and we're going to shade that. But again, here using the edge of the brush, just dragging it along the edge of this this robe, so we get this beautiful detail picked out in gold, and adds a really lovely bit of contrast, because it's got the difference in brightness and saturation is fantastic here between the two. Okay, Nuln Oil, lovely Nuln Oil all over, all that dark aluminium. And now what we've got is, with the Nuln Oil falling into the recesses, we just get the lovely volume and shape of the metal, but without that slightly dirtier, grittier feel that lead belcher has. And to me this looks like it's a really polished steel sword and a really well maintained plasma pistol. Alright, Reichland flesh. I'm using this for all of the gold. I'm also going to use this on her face. Getting rid of an errant hair there. I do tend to use different brushes for my washes because I have a set of brushes that I really like from Vallejo. They give me a lot of control. And then I have these slightly cheaper, more almost disposable brushes for things that are more difficult to wash out. So you can see there, getting in there with the Reichland flesh shade into the flesh as well. I'm not going too heavy on it, and then I'm going backwards and forward. It's fairly watered down, as you can see as well. So I can build this up nicely. But also I can wick it away from areas that I don't want it. And I'm on there too with some of the gold details and the little rope that's hanging down from the side. Okay, Berserker Bloodshade. And I'm going to give all of this Mephiston Red a fairly generous coating of this, but I just want to avoid any serious pooling. I do want to keep it, as you can see there, in the deeper recesses of the folds of the robe, but what I don't want is for it to pool and puddle, leaving me with those coffee stains on the larger flat areas where it wouldn't be. So I'm applying it quite heavily, and I'm going backward and forward between water and shade so I can wash it away in the areas that are raised and fill up those areas that aren't, and it'll give you this really lovely folded material effect. And just being careful not to get any on the gold as well. Back with the Reichland flesh shade, I decided to put this onto the XV88 areas just to give them a little bit of shape, and again washing it away from the higher points so that it doesn't pool and give us any horrible little puddle marks. But this picks out the detail nicely, and then what you can do as well is you can come back with the XV88 and just pick out those mid-tones again, like I'm doing here with the Mephiston Red on the robe. Raised areas, and I'm keeping this fairly loose and fairly wet so that I can blend it nicely into those darker areas, building up slowly over a couple of different layers. But you can't apply this all at once, otherwise you'll end up with a horrible texture to your paint, and it won't really give you the effect that you want. You'll have thick lines of Mephiston Red meeting dark areas, and here we've got this nice flow between areas. I'm just working on the highest points of the folds and the upper parts of her body as well, so the top part of the shoulders and the top part of the power pack. And then lastly, once that's properly thoroughly dry, just picking out some of the sharper edges and higher points with Evil Sun Scarlet, and it's going to give us a really nice bright highest point of highlight on this robe. And there you go, again just being very careful to get the edges and then wet blending it outwards so you get a nice smooth flow between the areas. Okay, now that all of my shades are dry with the Reichland flesh shade, I'm going to use the Vallejo pale flesh again just to come in and pick out some of the details in her face. It's nothing too serious because a tiny bit of this really does go a long way, because the contrast is so heavy and because faces are so recognizable to us. We pick out those details automatically anyway, so what we're doing is we're just guiding the eye around, and these little points of highlight just on the upper parts of the cheek, the bridge of the nose, maybe the top of the chin, will really help pick out her face. And what this also does is, because of the amount of contrast we have in the area, we don't have to spend a huge amount of time painting in the eyes. And then I'm doing exactly the same thing with Retributor armor back into those gold areas, just taking away some of the darkness of that Reichland flesh shade by bringing back some of that mid-tone in Retributor armor. And again, what you can do if you want to get really go for it is you can just pick out some of the very finest, highest points in even a silver color, and you'll get this absolutely beautiful shiny gold effect. And there, just picking out some of the higher points on those small details carefully. Mechanica Standard Grey, painting the whole base fairly generously in this. Just being careful around the feet so they don't, and the edges of the robe, so we don't ruin any of the details in the paint job that we've already done. But we want to get most of this base covered in this grey. I do like sometimes, because I make a lot of my bases out of cork, and I do like sometimes to go around the edges but not be too obsessed with getting every single tiny little corner, because I feel like there's a really nice pop of colour from the cork through these dark greys. It just gives it a more earthy effect. A heavy shade of Agrax Earthshade, really heavily going all over this dark greys, letting it fall into those little recesses that the cork naturally makes for us. That's going to bring this grounded area to life just a little bit. It'll take a while to dry, but it's definitely worth it in the end, because even if we spend a few extra minutes on those bases, it really does make a difference. Black Legion contrast paint just for the edge of the base. I do like the Black Legion because it just gives it a nice little shine, really finishes off the edge of the model. Sometimes it's nice to have a matte black, but in this case I think a nice shiny black is much better. And then I'm coming in with a small dry brush and just fairly generously brushing over a lot of that base. So we get the Mechanica Standard Grey coming through, and a lot of that Agrax Earthshade still sat in those recesses and those textured areas, but the Administratum Grey just really pops up the higher areas and gives it a bit of volume and shape. And there we have it. Sister Superior is finished. Did the entire kill team. That'll be up on the old eBay site soon. But I think this one came out well. Like and subscribe. See you soon.